Don't settle for bad socks. Get comfort and grip at an affordable price with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Choose from 18 different colors at puregripsocks.com.
When it comes to speed boots, even though all the marketing attention is focused in on the most expensive top-end options, it's really the much cheaper takedown models that are the most popular. And like I've talked about so many times on this channel before, not all takedown models are equal, and in the case of these two boots in particular, some are much more expensive than others, for no real reason. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new Adidas X Crazyfast 0.3 Laceless, the second tier takedown model in the new Crazyfast lineup that, just like the $270 0.1 variation, this too has a laceless upper construction. However, these are going to run you significantly less, with the retail price being $100. Exactly the same price as past laceless 0.3 takedowns from Adidas. And if laceless boots aren't your thing, they also offer a version of the Crazyfast 0.3 with laces. However, unlike past years where the 0.3 X model would run you between $80 and $85, this year the Crazyfast 0.3 retails for $95, which for comparison's sake is $10 more than the Nike equivalent in the Mercurial Vapor 15 Academy. And while it's all a matter of personal opinion, having tried pretty much all the Nike takedown models and all the Adidas ones, I can tell you from firsthand experience that Nike's Academy tier $80 to $100 price point tends to be pretty good. So for Adidas, who has a little bit more of a rocky history when it comes to football boots at this price point, for them to ask $10, $15, even $20 more than Nike alternatives, they better be pretty good. Which is exactly why I want to talk about the good and the bad of the new Crazyfast 0.3 takedown models. Are they genuinely worth the extra money over the Nike alternatives? Or if value for money is a priority for you, should they be avoided entirely? We're going to go over all the details, including how they fit and feel on feet. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around. And if you are interested in either of these boots for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the links down below. And as always, if you enjoy these brutally honest reviews, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2023. So starting with the upper, whether you go for the laced or laceless versions of the Crazyfast 0.3, you're going to get what is basically the exact same textile-based synthetic upper made up of two main pieces. Your top piece in white, which covers the majority of the top part of the foot, and then your second piece in neon yellow, where you can actually see the overlap right there between the two materials where they're effectively glued together. There are some perforations running throughout, but those ultimately are just there for the sake of cosmetics, with the liner itself being a really thin mesh where you can see the Adidas stripes right through it. It's very thin, it's borderline translucent, and as far as pliability is concerned, it's actually quite nice. I would say this is above average in terms of what we've seen in the past from Adidas takedown model speed boots, and for the price, even at $100 for this particular laceless variation, I think it is passable. It's going to give you a thin, barefoot-esque experience. Is it quite as premium as what you're going to find from a 0.1 or a plus model in the lineup? Absolutely not, but it does feel good and does relate to the higher end models to some extent. There's really no extra texture on the surface, so as far as extra grip is concerned, there really isn't any to be had here. And if I only had one complaint to make about this upper, it would be that you genuinely can feel where the two materials connect to each other and have that kind of overlap. It's just a little bit firmer against your foot, but after some wear time, you don't really notice it. And in general, they just feel like really thin barefoot speed boots. As for the lacing system, or lack thereof, depending on which one you go for, surprise, surprise, the overall fit and lockdown of the laced variation, which also happens to be $5 less expensive, is better than the laceless model. What you're going to find is this elasticated knit material that admittedly is not on the most premium end of things, but again, kind of what you expect from a 0.3 takedown model from Adidas. Nonetheless, it's super, super stretchy, makes putting the boot on and taking them off not too bad. And of course, with the laces running directly down the middle, once you tie the laces tight, the upper wraps your foot really nicely. The overall shaping of the boot, I think they did a pretty good job with, which we'll talk about later in the video. And from a lockdown perspective, the upper isn't lacking in structure, so they overall feel very secure through the midfoot. Where the laceless version, as you can see, appears to have pretty much the exact same knitted material. However, when you try to stretch it, it doesn't stretch almost at all. And that's because internally, they've actually lined the underside of that laceless system with a very thin layer of polyurethane. So very similar to what's happening on the surface of the upper, and that prevents it from overstretching. It's actually very similar to what they did on the Speedflow Plus a number of years back, which was a top-end model. However, it's on the inside rather than the outside, which I don't love that choice simply because this does have a little bit of kind of a stickiness to it when your sock runs along it, making this one of the most difficult laceless football boots to put on that I've ever tried. There's just very little stretch to this opening, and the back part is super structured, so the opening itself just doesn't get very large to slide your foot in. It can be very tricky, so definitely something to be aware of. But as far as lockdown and just general quality of fit from a laceless Takedown model, this is their best effort so far. I can genuinely say that if you're into the laceless boot thing, as long as you can live with struggling to put the boots on every single time you have to use them, once they are on your feet, the overall lockdown and general shaping of the boot, I think, is really good. It, of course, is not without its issues, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the video. But as far as a viable laceless system using cheaper materials like they've done here, this one does actually work pretty well. Which brings us to the rear, which is exactly the same on both boots. They do, of course, feature a low-cut construction, and then you're going to find a very solid internal heel counter that runs quite high. So it's structured even up here on the back of the heel, which I would say is slightly unusual, but doesn't necessarily feel uncomfortable on the 0.1 variation. And the only reason for that is because your heel is locked down a lot better because of the lacing system rather than the laceless system that you'll find on the alternate variation. Nonetheless, this, unlike so many Adidas Takedown models, does have a deeper overall fit in the heel. Is it still a little bit shallower than I would like it to be? Absolutely, but overall, this is a huge improvement over so many Adidas Takedown models that just feel super, super shallow. The Crazyfast 0.2 included. This has a more comfortable fit through the heel than the $160 version. So definitely something to keep in mind. The heel liner itself is this really soft mesh material with very targeted padding, but plenty of it. So in general, it hugs your heel really nicely. No issues with slippage. Relatively comfortable for an Adidas Takedown model. And then the insole is technically glued in. It just features a solid mesh liner on the surface, and it's a very thin layer of basically flat foam. So certainly not the most premium, considering that these are nearly $100 or exactly $100 if you go for the laceless model, but again, to be expected from Adidas at this price point. As for the base of the Crazyfast 0.3, it might have a similar appearance to the 0.1 and Plus models, but it is made from completely different materials that feel okay, but definitely don't have that same snapback sensation as you get from the actual plastic plate insert that the top end models have. This is instead just two different colors of plastic that ultimately just feel very flexible. Not bad in any way, but definitely not as speed boot-esque or as special as the more expensive variations. Solid sole plate nonetheless, and the stud pattern does remain the same across the entire Crazyfast line. Relatively aggressive, solid for a pair of speed boots, and in general, if you've worn an Adidas stud pattern over the last 10 to 12 years or so, you kind of know what to expect from these. When it comes to weight, regardless of price point, when you buy a pair of speed boots, I would assume the expectation is that the boots are going to feel light. So how much does the Crazyfast 0.3 weigh? And I guess even more specifically, how much does it weigh compared to the Nike Vapor 15 Academy alternative? So all in the same size 9.5 US. We'll start off with the laced version of the Crazyfast 0.3, and you can see that they weigh in at 9.25 ounces, the equivalent of 262 grams. As for the Crazyfast 0.3 laceless, they weigh in at 9.2 ounces, the equivalent of 260 grams. And finally, the Nike Vapor 15 Academy, they weigh in at 8.75 ounces, the equivalent of 248 grams. And just for fun, but also to prove a point, here's the $80 Tiempo Legend 10 Academy. Not exactly a speed boot, but in a size 9.5 US, you can see that they weigh in at 8.05 ounces, the equivalent of 228 grams, significantly lighter than all of these speed boots. All that to say that the Crazyfast 0.3 is not particularly light. It is in fact the heaviest in its class at this price point. The Nikes technically weigh a little bit less, but realistically, if you want the lightest pair of football boots on a sub $100 budget from a Takedown model, you should buy the Tiempo. Given the similarities between these two football boots, you might expect the on-feet fit and feel to be pretty similar, kind of as it is with the Crazyfast 0.1, given how similar those two models are. But honestly, because of the difference between a lacing system versus how the laceless setup works on the laceless version, these two football boots have a very different fit on feet, where with the lace model, I would say it's a lot more normal. The tension that you get from the lacing system is very even, and overall, the upper wraps your foot more closely, more comfortably, the heel lockdown is better. Overall, it is definitely the more comfortable of these two football boots, where with the laceless model, because of that polyurethane kind of reinforcing the lacing system from here to here, that's where all your tightness is. So it's not as tight in this kind of upper area of the forefoot, and it's certainly not as tight in terms of locking your heel in place inside of the football boot, which is why the overall heel lockdown and comfort just feels so much better on the laced variation, where with the laceless model, because all that tightness is just focused right in the middle of the football boot, in order for your heel to stay in place, there's just more pressure applied to it because it wants to lift, but the shape and kind of structure of the heel is preventing that from happening. So in terms of overall comfort, again, unsurprisingly, the laced variation is definitely the way to go. But as far as laceless Takedown models go, these wrap your foot very nicely. You can see in the overall shaping of the football boot, there's not a lot of extra space. And in general, the lockdown is above average, certainly a lot better than a lot of the laceless Takedown models that Adidas have put out in, I don't even want to say the last several years. Since they started making laceless Takedown models, these are actually really well done. From a width perspective, I would say they have a decent amount of width, more so again with the laced variation, just because that area across the top of the foot is able to stretch and you have the adjustability. I would definitely say the laceless model is not a great option for wider foot types, particularly when it comes to putting them on. The opening just doesn't get very big. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So regardless of whether you're going for the laced or laceless variation, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, while I don't think the X Crazyfast 0.3 is bad by any means, I actually think this is an above average effort from Adidas when it comes to Takedown models at this price point. When compared to the less expensive Nike alternatives, they are simply not as good. For $95, the laced version of the Crazyfast 0.3 is a very unwarranted price increase, and in general, not a bad pair of football boots, but I just think there are better options to be had if you're looking for something with laces that, again, are just less expensive. The Nike Tiempo Legend 10 Academy, in my opinion, would be a phenomenal option at this price point. But even so, if you want something that has a little bit more of a speed boot-esque vibe, while I think the Vapor 15 Academy is solid, I would actually go for the Phantom GX Low Academy. I think those, in terms of bang for your buck, you just can't go wrong if you're looking for a boot of this type. Whereas the laceless version does have one thing going for it that you really can't get from anything else, and that is the fact that it's laceless. And as far as 0.3 laceless models go, this is, I think, the best one Adidas has ever made. Whether or not that makes them worth the $100 price tag, however, I think there are some issues in regards to comfort and overall lockdown that, again, you can just get better football boots for less money.